The stars were dim that night as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Far away from the wars and the noise of countless planets, a single fortress floated in the void, broken and silent. Inside, Vortherax, the ancient dragon, lay among shattered consoles and dying lights. His scales, once bright as molten metal, were now dull and cracked. His eyes, which had seen centuries of civilizations rise and fall, flickered like fading stars. The dragon whispered something no one had heard before. Not an order, not a roar, just a name. Elias Crow stirred in his small home on the moon of Lyran 5. The room smelled of wood shavings and paint. Tiny toys lined the shelves, each carefully carved and painted. A wooden dragon sat on his workbench, wings folded as if it were sleeping. Elias had been awake, but suddenly the name echoed in his mind, soft and clear, like a bell ringing in a deep cave. He shook his head, thinking he was dreaming. But the voice returned, urgent this time, carrying a weight he could not ignore. The name was his. Elias Crow. He dropped the carving knife and stared at the toy dragon. The moon was quiet, almost empty, and yet he felt the call in every corner of his small workshop. He had lived alone for years, speaking to no one but his toys. People had laughed at him when he said he listened to whispers from the stars. They did not believe, and that was fine. Elias had never needed anyone to believe. But this was different. Something alive and vast was reaching for him, and it was dying. Elias did not know why the dragon knew his name. He had seen dragons in old stories, in digital archives, and even in secret records that only historians whispered about. But none of them had ever truly lived. None of them had ever called to him. And yet here it was, an ancient being, broken, calling out across space for him alone. He packed lightly, taking only what he might need. Tools, a few supplies, and the small wooden dragon he had carved long ago. It had no powers, no secrets, only the shape of a creature that had always fascinated him. He felt a strange comfort holding it. Perhaps it would remind the dragon of him. Perhaps it would remind him of what he was stepping into. The journey through space was quiet, save for the hum of the engines. Elias did not need maps or guides. Somehow he knew the way, as if the dragon's name had drawn a path through the darkness. He avoided checkpoints, patrols and sensors, moving like a shadow through the stars. Every time he thought of turning back, he felt the weight of the name again pulling him forward. As he approached the fortress, he saw it for the first time in its full size. It was massive, a skeleton of a civilization long gone, with metal plates scorched and walls cracked from centuries of neglect. The stars reflected off its broken surfaces like shards of glass. He shivered but did not stop. This place, so empty and lifeless to everyone else, was alive in some way for him. Inside, Vortherax's eyes opened. They were faintly glowing, but they still held power, curiosity, and sorrow. The dragon lifted his head slightly, as if recognizing the figure approaching. Elias took a careful step forward. He felt no fear, only a strange connection, a bond that he did not understand but did not question. The dragon's mouth moved, slow and deliberate. Elias Crow. The sound echoed through the empty halls. It was weak, almost gone, but it carried a weight that made the moon outside tremble. Elias held out the wooden dragon. It was small, fragile, and simple, but he hoped it could speak in some way to the dragon who had waited for him. Vortherax shifted slightly. The great beast's wings twitched, rusted and stiff, like sails that had not felt wind in centuries. He leaned closer to the sound of the toy's movement. His great mind, worn by time and loss, seemed to recognize something human in the gesture. It was not strength he sought. It was memory. It was the echo of a name spoken long ago by a small, quiet boy who had once shown curiosity, kindness, and care. Elias knelt beside the dragon, careful not to touch too much at once. He whispered almost to himself, "I'm here. I heard you." He did not know if the dragon could hear him clearly, but the weight of the moment made him speak anyway. For a long time the two existed in silence. One was dying, one was alive. One held the memories of centuries, one held the courage of a single human heart. The stars outside the fortress seemed to listen. A soft hum filled the air as the dragon's chest rose and fell slowly. Elias felt a strange warmth, not from fire or energy but from recognition. The dragon remembered him, and in remembering, the dragon had reached across space and time to find him. Hours passed. The fortress creaked. Lights flickered. But Elias did not leave. He stayed, speaking softly, moving gently, showing that he was there, that he cared. Vortherax, broken as he was, lifted a claw, not in threat but in acknowledgement. It hovered above Elias, trembling, immense, yet careful. It was the start of something no one else in the galaxy had ever seen. Not friendship, not alliance, not power, but understanding. A dying dragon had found the only human who knew his name. And a quiet toy maker had stepped forward, carrying nothing but a wooden dragon and a heart brave enough to answer the call. The dark of space was full of secrets, but one truth shone brighter than all the stars. Names have power even when whispered across the void. And sometimes, the smallest humans are the ones the universe waits for. Elias stayed until the first glimmer of light from the distant sun broke across the fortress walls. The dragon stirred slightly and turned his massive head toward him. Elias knew this was only the beginning. He did not know what came next, but he would answer the call, step by step, with the care and patience of someone who had always listened. And in that silence, across a galaxy that thought it knew everything, a human and a dragon shared a moment that could change the stars forever. Elias did not sleep that night. The fortress was quiet, yet every creak of metal and flicker of light seemed to speak to him. He had expected fear, perhaps awe, but not the strange calm he felt beside the dragon. Vortharax's eyes followed him, heavy and thoughtful, like a king watching someone he trusted. Elias studied the dragon in return, wondering what he could do for a creature that had existed longer than entire civilizations. He did not know, but he knew he could not leave. The galaxy, however, did not wait. By the next day, emissaries arrived in silent ships. They hovered just outside the fortress, small but fast, moving like shadows. Elias could hear them on his instruments, though the fortress sensors were damaged. They did not come to speak. They came to control. They wanted the dragon's power for themselves, or at least to ensure no human could influence it. Elias walked calmly to the edge of the main hall, where a broken viewport looked out into the stars. Through the haze of energy shields and drifting debris, he saw the small fleet of ships, each bristling with weapons. The emissaries sent messages, polite in tone but heavy with threat. Step away from the dragon. Leave the fortress. You cannot interfere. Elias smiled faintly, shaking his head. He held the wooden dragon in his hand, feeling its weight. It was fragile, but it carried a kind of certainty. I am not here for power, he said softly, though the messages could not hear him. I am here for the name. That is all. The fleet pulsed with readiness. They thought they could intimidate a human, but Elias did not flinch. He knew their fear. The galaxy had taught them that dragons were unstoppable, that humans were weak. He also knew that the dragon was dying, and the galaxy would not understand what mattered until it was too late. Inside the fortress, Elias moved from room to room. He checked the old consoles, the failing lights, the broken communication panels. Everything seemed useless, but to Elias it was like walking through a puzzle. He had grown up building toys that needed tiny mechanisms to work perfectly. Every gear and lever mattered. Perhaps, he thought, he could bring life back here the same way he brought life to his toys. Vortharax stirred as Elias worked. He did not speak, but his presence filled the space. Elias felt it like warmth, like a star pressing against the walls. The dragon remembered him. That memory alone was enough to give Elias courage. He was not a soldier, not a diplomat. He was a human who had once shown curiosity and care. And that was what mattered. The emissaries outside grew restless. They had sent messages again, sharper this time. Leave or be removed. The human has no authority here. Elias ignored them. Authority, he realized, was not the point. The point was understanding. The dragon was alive, and it was his choice to help it. No fleet, no weapons, no laws could change that. He returned to the main chamber, kneeling beside Vortharax. The dragon's eyes were dim, but he looked at Elias with recognition. The wooden dragon in Elias's hand seemed to respond to the faint glow of the great creature. It was small, ordinary, and human-made, yet it carried a story, a memory, and perhaps a spark of life that the fortress could not provide on its own. For hours Elias worked. He did not speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because the quiet was needed. He fixed circuits the galaxy had long forgotten, rerouted power through old systems, and adjusted failing life support mechanisms. Each movement was careful, precise, like painting a tiny scene on a wooden toy. Vortharax watched, the dragon's massive head resting low, his breathing shallow but steady. The fleet outside grew impatient. They moved closer, ready to act. Their sensors could not understand what Elias was doing. They only saw a small human moving in a dying fortress, touching broken machines, talking to a creature they did not understand. They believed he was foolish. Perhaps he was. But foolishness, Elias thought, was sometimes the only way to see clearly. Night fell again. The stars outside seemed sharper, closer. The fleet had not left. They hovered like predators waiting for a mistake. Elias ignored them. He worked by instinct, guided by memory and patience. Slowly the fortress responded. Lights flickered more steadily. Air systems stabilized. Weak power flowed through the halls. The dragon stirred more freely, lifting a claw and then another, testing the strength in his fading body. Elias knelt beside him and whispered, "It's okay. I'm here. You're not alone." The dragon's eyes, enormous and deep, seemed to soften. The fortress was still broken. The galaxy was still hostile. But in that room the human and the dragon shared something neither had expected: quiet trust. By the next cycle of stars the fleet outside seemed unsure. Elias did not confront them. He did not fight. He did not negotiate. He simply continued to help the dragon, showing patience, care, and understanding. The wooden dragon in his hand, once a toy, had become a symbol, a proof that even small things mattered, even small humans mattered, and even dying beings could be heard if someone took the time to listen. Vortherax moved closer to Elias, lowering his massive head onto the floor beside him. The dragon's breath was heavy but steady. Elias smiled faintly, brushing a hand along the scaled snout. No words could explain this moment, yet everything was clear. Power was not in weapons, fleets, or threats. Power was in connection. And a human who refused the galaxy could sometimes see what the galaxy could not. Outside, the emissaries hesitated. They waited for orders, unsure if the human's small actions could have any effect. They did not see the truth. Elias was not here to conquer. He was here to remember. And in remembering, he had already begun to change the balance of a galaxy that thought it controlled everything. The night passed and the stars shifted. The fortress seemed to breathe, slow but alive. Elias remained at the dragon's side, holding the wooden figure, speaking softly when needed, moving carefully through the space as if every step mattered. It did. And somewhere deep in the shadows, the galaxy began to wonder why a simple human had refused to leave. Why a toy maker had stepped forward when everyone else had turned away. The answer was simple: because some calls are too important to ignore. Some names are too precious to forget. And sometimes the smallest courage can hold the greatest power. By the time the first light of the distant sun reached the fortress walls, Elias knew he had made a choice the galaxy could not understand. He would not leave. He would not yield. He would remain with the dragon, the dying giant who had called only to him. And in that choice, a quiet shift began, a beginning no fleet could stop, no order could undo, and no threat could erase. The dragon, the fortress, and the human, a quiet toy maker who refused the galaxy, were together. And for the first time in centuries the stars seemed to hold their breath. Elias sat beside the great dragon, watching him carefully. Vortherax's scales, once bright and sharp, were dull and cracked. His wings twitched weakly, as if the wind of centuries had finally left him. He tried to move, but each motion cost effort. Elias could feel the dragon's strength fading, and yet there was still fire in his eyes, not the fire of heat but the fire of memory. The dragon remembered everything, and in that memory, Elias could see the echoes of an age long gone. "You remember me?" Elias whispered. His voice was soft, but he could feel the weight of it in the vast room. The dragon's head lifted slightly, and his great eyes fixed on Elias. He did not speak, but he did not need to. The connection was there, more real than any words could carry. Elias reached out, brushing the dragon's snout with a careful hand. Vortherax flinched slightly at the touch, not in fear but in recognition. Elias thought back to his childhood. He had been small, quiet, and unnoticed, but he had always been curious. He had read stories about dragons, about creatures that could live for thousands of years, and he had carved models and toys, imagining their power. He had never imagined that one day, a dragon would know his name and seek him out in the dark reaches of space. Yet here he was, kneeling beside a creature that had shaped history with its wings and breath, and now relied on him simply to stay alive. The dragon shifted, his massive body trembling. Elias noticed the faint glow of energy flowing through his chest. It was weak, nearly gone, but it was there. Vortherax tried to lift his head higher, but exhaustion pinned him down. Elias adjusted the wooden dragon he held, placing it near the great beast's claws. It was a small gesture, a toy beside a giant, but it seemed to comfort the dragon. Elias realized something important. The dragon was not asking for strength or weapons. He was asking for recognition, for a reminder that someone remembered him when the galaxy had already forgotten. The fortress creaked around them. Broken panels sparkled with weak light. Outside, the stars glimmered cold and distant, and the fleets that had threatened him earlier were gone, at least for now. Elias understood that the galaxy could not comprehend what he and the dragon shared. No laws, no fleets, No armies could measure memory, connection, or loyalty. Vortherax did not need followers. He needed someone who had seen him as he was long ago when humans were small and overlooked. Hours passed in silence. Elias moved carefully, repairing old systems with the same patience he had used to craft his toys. Every action was precise. A panel replaced here, a wire connected there. He did not understand all of the technology, but he understood logic and balance. Every fix he made seemed to stabilize the dragon a little, as if the creature could sense care and responded to it instinctively. Vortherax opened his eyes slightly. He watched Elias move, his great head turning slowly to follow each small motion. The dragon's breath came in shallow waves. His fire was gone, burned out by time and age. Elias knew there would be no roaring flames, no blazing displays of strength. This was not a dragon of conquest. This was a dragon of memory, of wisdom, and of history. Elias felt humbled by the presence of such a being. "Do you know why I am here?" Elias asked quietly. He did not expect an answer, but he spoke anyway. The dragon did not speak. Instead, he blinked, a slow, heavy motion that seemed almost human in its emotion. Elias understood. He was there because of the past, because of trust, and because a name had been remembered. Nothing else mattered. Not politics, not fleets, not the galaxy's fear. Just the quiet bond of recognition between a human and a dragon who had lived through centuries. The wooden dragon beside him seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Elias picked it up and placed it on the dragon's massive claw. Vortherax shifted again, careful not to crush it. Elias smiled faintly. Perhaps it reminded him of simpler times, of a small boy who had looked at dragons not as monsters but as creatures to respect and understand. Perhaps it reminded the dragon that even in a galaxy full of power and greed, someone had cared enough to remember. Time passed slowly. The fortress seemed alive, as if it breathed with them. Elias sat cross-legged on the cold metal floor, watching the dragon. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He simply stayed, keeping the dragon company. In the silence, he began to hear whispers of the dragon's memories. Not words exactly, but flashes of ancient skies, of battles, of stars burning bright long before humans had walked freely among them. Elias realized that the dragon had lived more lifetimes than anyone could count, and yet he had chosen to reach out to him now, to trust him in these final hours. Night turned into day. The weak light of distant suns filtered through the broken viewport. Elias adjusted a panel near the dragon's head, careful not to disturb him. The dragon blinked slowly, following every movement with his massive eyes. Elias felt a strange pride, though he did not fully understand why. He was small and quiet, but here he was, beside the greatest being in the galaxy, offering comfort and care where no one else could. Finally, the dragon moved his head closer to Elias. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it was deliberate. Elias reached out and placed his hand on Vortherax's snout. He felt warmth, faint but real, and something else: acceptance. The dragon did not speak and he did not breathe fire, but in that moment, Elias understood that trust, patience, and memory could be as powerful as any weapon. The stars outside seemed to shimmer more brightly. The galaxy could not see this moment, could not understand it, and that was fine. Elias did not care. He had learned the truth the galaxy had forgotten. Strength is not always measured in fire or fleets, and legacy is not always written in conquest. Sometimes, it is kept alive in memory, in recognition, and in quiet, simple acts of care. Elias remained beside the dragon as the first light of a distant star touched the fortress. Vortherax lifted his head slightly, resting it against Elias's shoulder. The dragon's fire was gone, but his presence remained, immense and eternal. And in that moment, Elias realized that a dying dragon without fire could still teach the galaxy lessons it had long ignored. He whispered once more, "I'm here, Vortherax. I won't leave." And for the first time in centuries, the dragon seemed at peace. The stars outside the fortress were quiet, but the galaxy was not. Word had spread quickly. A human had reached the dying dragon, and he did not fight or beg. He simply stayed. Fleets from neighboring systems and empires moved cautiously, hovering in the darkness just outside the ruined fortress. They had come to see what a human could do. They expected fear, they expected chaos, maybe even betrayal. They were wrong. Elias Crow moved through the fortress with calm steps. His hands were steady as he adjusted panels and repaired broken systems. The dragon lay nearby, its massive head resting low, watching every move. Elias felt the weight of the galaxy's eyes, but he ignored them. Authority and power meant nothing here. Understanding and care were the only things that mattered. The first ship arrived close enough to open communication channels. A voice crackled, formal and sharp. "Human, step away from the dragon immediately. You are trespassing in restricted space. Leave or you will be removed." Elias did not answer. He did not need to. He knew they would not understand. Words were useless against fear. Instead, he continued his work, rerouting power and repairing air circulation. Every tiny adjustment seemed to ease the dragon's movements, and Elias knew that it was working. Vorthorax stirred slightly, lifting one claw then another, testing his strength. The voice came again, sharper now. "This is your final warning. Leave the dragon or face consequences." Elias paused for a moment, looking out at the fleet of ships. They were armed, ready to fire, yet he felt no fear. They saw him as small and weak, but they could not see the truth. He was not here for war. He was here to honor a promise, to respond to a name called across the stars. Inside, Vorthorax shifted, his great head turning toward Elias. The dragon's eyes were dim but focused. It was a silent command: "Continue, do not falter." Elias understood. He returned to the panels, adjusting wires and circuits, each movement precise. The fortress, long abandoned and decaying, began to respond. Lights flickered on in small areas, weak power hummed through broken conduits, and the air, once stale, became easier to breathe. The emissaries outside whispered among themselves. They had never seen a human act like this. They had expected fear or at least hesitation. Instead, the human moved with purpose, calm and careful, touching broken machinery as if it were a living creature. The fleets could not understand what they were seeing. It was not force. It was not strategy. It was patience, attention, and the courage to stand in a place no one else could. Elias placed the wooden dragon carefully on a table near Vorthorax. Its wings were folded, and its small eyes seemed to reflect the fading light of the fortress. Elias whispered softly, "This is for you. It's nothing, but it is everything." The dragon lifted his massive head slightly as if acknowledging the gesture. That small toy, simple and human-made, carried meaning the fleets outside could never comprehend. Hours passed. The stars shifted. Outside, the galaxy waited, unsure what to do. Inside, Elias continued his careful work. Every panel repaired, every wire reconnected, every small spark of energy brought comfort to the dragon. Vorthorax moved more freely, testing his body. He could not rise fully, but the effort mattered. Elias understood that strength was not always physical. Sometimes it was the courage to persist in silence. The fleets outside began to murmur, unsure of what they were witnessing. Some sent messages trying to provoke, to force a reaction. Elias ignored them all. He did not speak to the galaxy. He only spoke to the dragon, quietly, with respect and patience. "You're not alone. I am here. I will not leave." Vorthorax's eyes, immense and deep, followed him, and Elias felt the dragon's silent trust settle over the room. The wooden dragon seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Elias picked it up and held it closer. He could feel the history of the fortress, the weight of the dragon's memories, and the attention of a galaxy watching him. And yet he did not flinch. He did not run. He did not yield. He stood quietly, carefully, showing that the smallest human could act with patience and courage, even when watched by the entire galaxy. Vorthorax shifted again, moving a claw toward Elias. The gesture was slow but deliberate. Elias knelt beside the dragon, brushing his hand gently along the great snout. He whispered again, "I am here. I hear you. You are not forgotten." The dragon closed his eyes briefly, a gesture of trust. Elias realized that the galaxy could not understand this. They would not see the strength and quiet care. They would not see the courage and patience. The fleets outside were uneasy. They hovered, waiting, unsure if the humans' calm was weakness or defiance. Some began to record, thinking this was a strange form of power. Others whispered about the history of humans, how they had once been ignored, underestimated, and overlooked. They did not yet know that humans could do more than fight. They could see, remember, and stand quietly when it mattered most. Inside the fortress, Elias continued his work. Vorthorax moved closer, resting his head near the human. His wings twitched slightly, testing balance, testing energy. The dragon was still weak, still fading, but the presence of Elias brought stability. It was not fire, not weapons, not fleets. It was patience, understanding, and care. That was power enough. As night turned into day, the fortress hummed with faint life. The dragon's breathing grew steadier, and Elias smiled faintly. Outside, the galaxy watched in confusion. They had expected spectacle, confrontation, or fear. Instead, they saw a human standing quietly beside a dying dragon, repairing what was broken, honoring a name called across space. And slowly the truth began to reach the fleets. Strength is not always in firepower. Authority is not always in fleets. Legacy is not always won through war. Sometimes, it is kept alive in recognition, in courage, and in care. Elias Crow, the quiet toy maker, was teaching the galaxy a lesson no one had expected. By the time the distant sun touched the broken walls of the fortress, Elias remained at Vortherax's side. The dragon lifted his head slightly, resting it near the human's shoulder. It was a gesture of trust, recognition, and silent respect. The galaxy could watch, but they could not intervene. They could not understand the quiet power of a human who refused to leave when all else had turned away. And in that moment, among flickering lights, broken walls, and the quiet hum of renewed systems, a human and a dragon shared a bond stronger than fleets, louder than weapons, and deeper than fear. The galaxy had begun to notice, and the smallest actions of a single human had begun to change the stars. The first light of distant stars spilled through the broken walls of the fortress. Vortherax stirred slightly, lifting his massive head, but the great dragon did not speak. Elias knelt beside him, feeling the steady weight of history in every movement of the ancient creature. Time had taken much from Vortherax, his strength, his fire, his fleet, but it had not taken his wisdom. And now he had chosen to leave it in the hands of a human. Elias reached out and touched the dragon's snout gently. The wooden toy he carried from his workshop sat between them, a small, quiet symbol of connection. The dragon's eyes, enormous and deep, followed him as if testing the human's patience one last time. Elias whispered softly, "It's all right. You don't need to fight anymore. You're remembered." Outside, the galaxy had gathered to watch. Ships hovered in cautious formation, sensors tracking every flicker of movement. They expected chaos, fire, or surrender. They expected the human to fail or betray. Instead, they watched silence, and that silence spoke louder than any fleet. A human, small and quiet, had kept a dying dragon alive, not with weapons but with care, understanding, and the courage to remain when all else had turned away. The dragon lifted his great claw and placed it near Elias. The gesture was deliberate, careful, and heavy with meaning. Elias held out his hand and their fingers, scaled and human, met. It was not strength that connected them. It was trust, recognition, and memory. The galaxy could not understand it, and perhaps it never would. But that did not matter. Elias had learned something no empire could teach. Even the smallest human could hold the legacy of a creature older than the stars. Vortherax shifted slightly and lifted his head higher. He looked out at the distant stars, not in fear or anger but in reflection. His voice, deep and ancient, trembled as he finally spoke. "Remember, humans, they see what others cannot, they listen, they care." Each word carried the weight of centuries. Elias did not need translation. He understood. The dragon had chosen to leave this truth behind for humanity, a gift not of conquest but of respect. Elias knelt quietly, holding the dragon's massive head in his hands. "I will remember," he said simply. The dragon closed his eyes and the energy in the room seemed to settle. The fortress, once broken and lifeless, now felt warmer, steadier, as if the dragon's presence was leaving behind a calm strength that would not fade. Outside, the fleet stirred uneasily. They had expected spectacle and control, but instead they had seen patience, care, and courage. They had seen a human rise without weapons, without fleets, without fear. Elias had not conquered, yet he had changed the galaxy's view of what a human could be. Vortherax's legacy would live on not through fire or destruction, but through understanding and recognition, passed to the species that had been overlooked for so long. Hours passed and the dragon grew still. Elias remained by his side, whispering softly, reminding him of the name he had called across the stars so long ago. Vortherax's breath slowed, then stopped. The immense body lay still, but there was peace in the stillness. The dragon had passed, but the lesson he left behind was alive, carried by a human who had answered a call that no one else had heard. Elias sat for a long time, the wooden dragon in his lap. The galaxy outside waited, unsure how to react. Some ships departed quietly, unsure of what they had witnessed. Others stayed to record and report, but no words could fully explain what had happened inside the fortress. The galaxy could not take the lesson from Elias. It could only learn from him if it chose to watch carefully, to listen, and to remember. Finally, Elias rose. He walked through the fortress slowly, touching the panels and consoles he had repaired. He looked at the faint glow of the lights, at the calm air, at the silence that felt alive. Vortherax was gone, yet the dragon's presence remained in every careful adjustment, every repaired system, and every memory Elias carried. The galaxy would never see the full truth, but humans could feel it. They could remember the importance of listening, of care, and of recognizing the quiet strength in small acts. Elias returned to his ship, carrying the wooden dragon. He did not seek power or recognition. He did not want command or empire. He only wanted to honor what he had been entrusted with, the memory of a dragon who had chosen him, and the lesson that humans could see what others overlooked. The stars were bright and the void was quiet, but now it carried a new hope. The galaxy had learned something it had never expected. A human, patient and small, could hold the legacy of a creature that had lived for thousands of years. Strength was not always measured in fleets or fire. Legacy was not always earned through conquest. Sometimes, it was kept alive in memory, in care and in courage. Elias understood this, and he would carry it forward, quietly, patiently, and with respect for the galaxy around him. As the ship left the fortress behind, the stars stretched endlessly ahead. Elias held the wooden dragon, feeling the weight of responsibility and wonder. He had been chosen not to lead armies but to preserve memory. He had been called not to conquer but to witness and care. And in that quiet role, the galaxy would change slowly as humans were finally seen for what they could be. Elias looked back at the fading fortress one last time. The dragon was gone, but his name, his memory, and his trust had been given to humanity. It was not fire that had changed the stars, nor weapons, nor empire. It was recognition. It was courage. It was a small human answering a call that no one else had heard. The galaxy watched silently, unsure if it understood. But one thing was certain. What the dragon had left humanity was more powerful than any fleet or weapon. It was hope, trust, and the knowledge that even the smallest human could make the greatest difference. Elias turned to the stars ahead, carrying the lesson forward. The dragon's voice, though gone, remained in his heart. Humans see what others cannot, and sometimes that is enough to change everything.